The concept of time travel has fascinated both scientists and storytellers for centuries. One of the most intriguing and perplexing paradoxes associated with time travel is known as the grandfather paradox. This thought experiment raises critical questions about the nature of time, causality, and the potential consequences of traveling backward in time. But what exactly is the grandfather paradox, and how does it challenge our understanding of reality? What is the grandfather paradox? The grandfather paradox is a classic paradox that arises from the idea of time travel to the past. Imagine this. A person from the future travels back in time to the period when their grandfather was young. They, for some reason, interfere with their grandfather's life, perhaps preventing him from meeting their grandmother or even going so far as to harm him. The key idea here is that by altering the past, they are preventing their own birth, as they would no longer exist in a timeline where their grandfather was never able to have children. This creates a logical contradiction. If the time traveler's grandfather never has children, then the time traveler would never have been born. If the time traveler was never born, they could never have traveled back in time in the first place. Therefore, the paradox suggests that the time traveler's actions in the past prevent the very event that allowed them to travel back in time, causing an infinite loop of contradictions. The nature of the paradox, the grandfather paradox, highlights one of the most perplexing features of time travel: the relationship between cause and effect, or causality. In the scenario described, the time traveler's action, preventing their grandfather from having children, leads to their non-existence, which in turn negates the possibility of them ever traveling back to cause the change in the first place. This creates a causal loop, which seems to defy logic. The paradox forces us to ask fundamental questions. If time travel is possible, how can we make sense of the fact that actions in the past can undo the very circumstances that allowed those actions to take place? Could there be a mechanism in the universe that prevents this type of contradiction from occurring? Or does the paradox suggest that time travel to the past is simply impossible? Different theories to resolve the paradox. Several theories have been proposed to address the grandfather paradox and other time travel conundrums. Let's explore a few of these theories. 1. The many worlds interpretation, multiverse theory. One possible solution to the grandfather paradox comes from the many worlds interpretation of quantum mechanics. According to this theory, every time a person travels back in time and alters the past, they do not create a contradiction within the same timeline. Instead, their actions split reality into multiple, parallel universes, each one representing a different outcome. In this case, if the time traveler prevents their grandfather from having children, they would not erase their own existence in the original timeline, but rather create an alternate reality where the time traveler was never born. In the original timeline, however, the time traveler would still exist and continue their journey in the future. This theory suggests that there could be an infinite number of timelines, each representing a different version of reality, and that changing the past doesn't lead to paradoxes because new timelines are created with each change. 2. The Novikov self-consistency principle. Another way to resolve the paradox is through the Novikov self-consistency principle, which suggests that any actions taken by a time traveler in the past must be consistent with the timeline's established history. In other words, the universe somehow protects itself from paradoxes. If the time traveler tries to prevent their grandfather from having children, they would encounter obstacles that prevent them from succeeding. For example, they might not be able to harm their grandfather or even prevent him from meeting their grandmother. This principle assumes that events in the past are already locked in and cannot be altered in a way that creates logical contradictions. Essentially, the universe has a built-in mechanism for ensuring consistency, which means that no matter what the time traveler attempts, the past will unfold in a way that avoids paradoxes. 3. The fixed timeline hypothesis. Another solution comes from the idea of a fixed timeline, which suggests that the timeline is immutable and cannot be changed, no matter what. Under this hypothesis, the time traveler would not be able to change events in the past because those events are predetermined. This means that the time traveler might try to kill the grandfather, but somehow, they would fail, or the grandfather would survive, because the timeline is unchangeable. This theory treats time as a rigid, pre-established structure where all events are set in stone, and attempts to change history would either be impossible or would simply lead to the same eventual outcome. The idea is that time itself enforces a tie of self-consistency, preventing any alterations that could result in paradoxes. 4. Time travel is impossible. Finally, some physicists and philosophers argue that time travel to the past is simply impossible. According to this view, the laws of physics prevent backward time travel because such travel would inevitably create paradoxes that are fundamentally unresolvable. The argument is that, even if we could theoretically travel through time, the contradictions posed by paradoxes like the grandfather paradox would imply that backward time travel is inherently flawed. In this case, the very existence of time travel to the past would violate the principles of causality, leading to logical inconsistencies. If time travel were possible, there would likely be some mechanism, whether a law of physics or some kind of universal rule, that would prevent paradoxes from occurring. Implications of the grandfather paradox. The grandfather paradox raises profound questions not only about time travel but also about the nature of reality itself. It forces us to examine the relationship between time, causality, and the possibility of free will. If time travel were possible, would we be able to change the past, or is the past set in stone, waiting to unfold exactly as it already has? Additionally, the paradox challenges our intuitions about cause and effect. In our everyday experience, we understand that the future is shaped by the present and the past. The idea of a person traveling back in time to change the past creates a disruption in this natural order, suggesting that the future might not be as fixed as we'd believe. The grandfather paradox also brings us to the larger question of the nature of time itself. Is time a continuous, linear progression, or is it more like a fluid, malleable construct that can be bent and shaped by extraordinary events, such as time travel? Can the universe accommodate paradoxical situations, or is there an underlying mechanism that keeps everything in balance? Conclusion. The grandfather paradox is one of the most famous and enduring thought experiments in the philosophy of time travel. It forces us to confront the complexities of time, causality, and the possibility of changing history. While there are several theories that attempt to resolve the paradox, from the many worlds interpretation to the Novichok self-consistency principle, the true nature of time travel remains a mystery. Whether or not time travel to the past is even possible is still a subject of intense debate among physicists, but one thing is clear. The grandfather paradox continues to challenge our understanding of the universe and its most fundamental laws.